Hello, a quick reminder here that starting next week, our Let's Play videos will be moving over to True Masters Morons Play. Link in the description, go check it out. Hello everyone, our topic this week was requested by all of these lovely people. We'll be going over Link from the Legend of Zelda franchise. Spoilers for all things Zelda. Duh.
Okay, so Link is the protagonist of the Zelda franchise as a whole. As the playable character, he is arguably the most important of the big three in the Zeldaverse, with the other two people of importance being Zelda and Ganon, or Ganondorf. We're just gonna call him Ganon for the whole thing again, that's fine. Zelda is usually Link's greatest ally in the fight against evil, and Ganon is usually the big evil in question. But to make things simpler before going forward, we're going to do a little bit of background setup. One of the most important MacGuffins in the Zeldaverse is the Triforce, a mystical object forged by three goddesses at the creation of the world. Should a mortal touch the Triforce, they are granted any wish their heart desires. However, if that person's heart is unbalanced, the Triforce splits into three pieces, the Triforces of Courage, Wisdom, and Power, and the unbalanced actor retains only the Triforce Third that most pertains to their personal outlook. Alternatively, the Triforce can be disassembled on purpose. In most of the games dealing with the Triforce, it is separated either before the game begins or early on in the story, and they always find their way to the same people. Ganon will gain the Triforce of Power, Zelda will gain the Triforce of Wisdom, and Link will gain the Triforce of Courage. The effects of the Triforce are nebulous and arguable, but ultimately they help define each character's role in the story. Ganon is the powerful bad guy, causing a ruckus. Zelda is the person who knows how to stop Ganon, or is otherwise required to see him stopped, and Link is the one who has to face dangerous trials to see Ganon defeated.
Link is always the hero of each game's story, but he's not always the same person. Many of the games take place centuries or even millennia apart, and while the Link character always has similar traits and a similar appearance, only a handful of times does the same Link appear in multiple games. He usually has a penchant for sword and or shield as his go-to weaponry, usually wears a predominantly green outfit, and always courageously faces whatever challenges may come his way, no matter how crazy they might be. If the game references his life prior to the start of his adventures, he is most commonly a knight or a blacksmith. Similarly, Ganon and Zelda are not always the same people, but generally carry similar characteristics throughout the series. For a more detailed look at Ganon, check out our lore video on him here and in the description below. As a final note before we really get started, we're going to be following the established Zelda timelines in universe chronology as we go over the main stories of Link's adventures, with the addition of the two most recent games, Breath of the Wild and Hyrule Warriors 2. Now, we all know that the Zelda timeline is set in wet clay at best, but it's all we've got, and it gives us a good chronological framework to work from, so we're using it. That being said, that's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started.
The first game to take place is Skyward Sword, taking place in the earliest annals of the world's history. Prior to the beginning of the game, the goddesses who created the world entrusted the Triforce to another, seemingly lesser god, Hylia, who ruled the land in peace until the rise of Demise, a powerful demonic figure who brought an army of monsters to bear against Hylia and the mortals. She sent her people up into an island in the sky, hiding the Triforce there, then rallied the other races to battle Demise. They defeated Demise, but were forced to seal him away, as the gravely wounded Hylia no longer possessed the strength to destroy him outright after their struggle. More than 1,000 years later, Skyward Sword begins. In this first incarnation, Link was a knight of Hylia's floating island, and Zelda, unbeknownst to herself, was the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia. Zelda is brought down to the surface, where the Sky Dwellers never go, by an agent of Demise, planning to use her to break the seal on Demise's prison. With the aid of Impa, a reoccurring character who is almost always some form of aid to Zelda, Zelda escapes Demise's agents and begins regaining her memories as Hylia, spending much of the rest of the game traveling around purifying herself so that she can fully channel Hylia's powers. Meanwhile, Link battles Demise's minions while traveling around empowering a special weapon called the Goddess Sword, with the end result being that it becomes the Master Sword, a powerful reoccurring weapon against evil and usually the only thing capable of defeating Ganon in the various games. Along the way, a weakened Demise partially breaks free of his imprisonment several times, with Link sealing him back up each time. Zelda ultimately heads back in time to reinforce the seal on Demise, preventing him from escaping completely, while Link finds the Triforce and wishes Demise out of existence in the present, freeing Zelda from the millennial stasis that resulted from her seal reinforcement ritual. In response, Demise's servants dragged Zelda back in time once more and fed her soul to Demise, who had not yet been wished out of existence in that timeline. Resultantly, Demise was allowed to break free completely from his containment for the first time, and he and Link engaged in battle. Demise was defeated and seemingly absorbed into the Master Sword, but not before levying a curse upon Link and Zelda. He proclaimed that an incarnation of his hatred would follow their successors throughout time. Those born with the blood of the goddess, Zelda, and the spirit of the hero, Link, would be locked in eternal, cyclical battle with the manifestation of Demise's hatred, Ganon, which is how the rest of the series happens. It is inferred that the game ends with Link, Zelda, who was revived after Demise's defeat, and the others establishing Hyrule down on the surface, Hyrule being the kingdom in which most of the games take place.
Hundreds, possibly thousands of years later, we get the events of the Minish Cap. 100 years before Minish Cap, the kingdom of Hyrule was beset by monsters, but were saved by the Minish, a race of Thumbelina-sized people who brought with them the Light Force, who were in turn aided by the Hero of Men, who, based upon legends and visuals, was another Link archetype that we don't play, who sealed all of those evils away into what was basically a Pandora's box, locking it shut with what would become the Four Sword. In the modern day, an evil Minish named Vati gained great magical power, and looking for even greater power, sought the Light Force. To that end, he shattered the sword lock on Pandora's box, releasing all of the evils inside, believing that the Light Force was inside. He was wrong. In an effort to save himself some trouble, he then turned Princess Zelda to stone, as she was nearby for the ceremony he ruined by releasing all the evils from the box. He could tell that she had great power, and petrified her to avoid having to confront her later, which was ironic considering she actually held the Light Force he was looking for inside of her. In this game, Link is a friend of Zelda's and is recruited by Zelda's father, the king, to stop Vati, handle the monster situation, and cure Zelda's condition. Link spends his time battling evil and acquiring the materials necessary to reforge the broken Key Sword into the Four Sword, a blade capable of dispelling the petrification curse on Zelda, as well as possessing the ability to split its wielder into 4 copies. Around similar times, Vati and Link both discover that Zelda holds the power of light within her, and so engage in battle over her, with Vati being empowered thanks to siphoning off some of the light force within Zelda. When he is defeated, Vati is sealed into the Four Sword, which is then sheathed into a pedestal to keep him locked away. Zelda uses the magical MacGuffin that granted Vati much of his power, combined with what remained of her light force, to wish the evil away from the kingdom, and everyone was happy.
Four Swords is the next game. Taking place a few generations later, the seal on Vati weakened over time, and so he eventually broke free of his own accord. He had no memory of his past life, the Minish, who had left after the events of Minish Cap, or indeed anything else, and so just set about being an evil dick, kidnapping beautiful women for his own enjoyment before being locked away into the Four Sword again. All of this off-screen and prior to the Four Swords game. At the beginning of the Four Swords game, Zelda, sensing the rise of some powerful evil, brings Link, a trusted ally, with her to investigate the Four Sword. Upon arrival, Vati breaks free, kidnaps Zelda, with plans to marry her in commemoration of his newfound freedom, again he remembers nothing of previous events, and kicks off to his hideout. Link draws the Four Sword, gaining the power to split into 4 identical copies. He is told by fairies that they can take him to Vati to save Zelda, but only after Link has proven his courage, so Link spends the game tackling a handful of dungeons and challenges before the fairies deign to guide him to Vati. Vati is once more sealed into the Four Sword, and life proceeds on.
Next, we have Ocarina of Time. In this game, Zelda has reason to believe that Ganon, leader and only male born to the Gerudo people, basically desert Amazons, who has recently sworn fealty to her father the king, has ulterior motives. She believes he seeks the Triforce, which is locked behind a seal in the Temple of Time. She also happens to be right. Fearing that Ganon will find all of the keys to the seal and take the Triforce for evil, she enlists the aid of Link in tracking down the keys and getting to the Triforce first in order to protect it. Link does so, facing down tremendous danger, but acquiring the 3 mystical keys to the temple, which grants access to the Master Sword, which acts as the key to the gateway between Hyrule and the Sacred Realm, a holy land where the Triforce has been secreted away. Unfortunately, Link, though courageous, was just a child, and so when he drew the Master Sword, he was immediately placed into a 7-year slumber, until such time as he had grown strong enough to properly wield the Master Sword and face evil as he was meant to. The side effect was that Link opened the door to the Triforce and then was locked away, leaving no one to guard it. So Ganon walked through the open door, taking the Triforce and corrupting both Hyrule and the Sacred Realm with his evil. But the Triforce split before he could make his wish, leaving Ganon with the Triforce of Power, Zelda with the Triforce of Wisdom, and Link with the Triforce of Courage. Link was hidden in stasis, so Ganon couldn't get to him, and Zelda successfully hid for the 7 years Link was out of commission, continuously evading Ganon's grasp. When Link was awakened, he was informed of the situation and set about seeking the 7 sages who would be needed to help cleanse the Sacred Realm and seal Ganon's power. Link spends the rest of the game finding and saving the sages and sending them to the sage who had placed Link in stasis in the first place, before Ganon eventually captured Zelda, the last of the sages, and Ganon, Link, and eventually Zelda engaged in battle.
Ocarina of Time is arguably the most important game in the series, because after Ocarina of Time, the Zeldaverse timeline splits into 3 different timelines, taking a multiverse time theory approach to the shenanigans that occur in the games. One timeline is created if Link is killed, specifically during the final confrontation, possibly during other moments during his adventure, but for sure during the final confrontation. 2 more are created if he succeeds, leading to the Fallen Hero timeline, the Child Era timeline, and the Adult Era timeline, respectively. If Link defeats Ganon, the sages seal him into the Sacred Realm, now corrupted and called the Dark Realm, and Ganon vows that he will break free and have his vengeance. Afterward, Link is sent back to his own time as a child. The child timeline is the one created when he returns to his own time, informs Zelda and the King of Ganon's treachery, and thwarts Ganon's plans before allowing him to obtain a piece of the Triforce. The adult timeline is what happens to the world that adult Link left behind, the one where Ganon ruled for 7 years, was defeated, and all of the sages were gathered. Alternatively, if Link is slain in the final battle, we have the Fallen Hero timeline. Ganon takes the Triforce pieces from both Link and Zelda, but is still temporarily trapped in the Dark Realm by the sages.
We're going to start with the adult timeline, the one created by the world that Link leaves heroless when he goes back to his own childhood. Time passes and Ganon does in fact break free as he promised, terrorizing Hyrule while no hero rises to meet him. With no Link to save them, the people pray to the gods for deliverance, and in response, the people are shepherded to mountaintops while Hyrule is flooded, trapping but not killing Ganon deep below the surface while the common people develop island nations. Hundreds more years pass, and Wind Waker begins. Ganon frees himself from imprisonment and begins kidnapping young girls in hopes of finding the new Zelda and thus the Triforce of Wisdom. In doing so, he crosses paths with both Link and Zelda, resisting Link's efforts as the Master Sword's power had waned. Link spends most of the rest of the game regaining the sword's power, while also putting the Triforce of Courage back together as it had been broken, while Zelda has to reassemble the Triforce of Wisdom, also broken. The game culminates beneath the waves in a battle between Link, Zelda, and Ganon. Ganon initially proves victorious, summoning the completed Triforce, only to have Hyrule's old king, who spends most of the game as Link's boat, wish that all of Hyrule in stasis there below the sea would flood, keeping Ganon from making a wish. Furious, Ganon engages Link and Zelda again, only to be defeated and turned to stone with the Master Sword planted deep in his skull. Link and Zelda escape, then set off with their people in search of a new land to call home.
Which leads directly into Phantom Hourglass. This is the first of the timeline that we're discussing that actually has the same Link. As they travel in search of new land, they hear rumors of disappearing ships in this new region of the sea, and move to investigate. Doing so causes them to cross paths with a ghostly ship and a monster called Bellum, a creature that devours the life force of others. Zelda is turned to stone as her life force is devoured, while Link is cast off the ship. He spends the game gaining allies and forging a sword capable of harming Bellum with their help, before reboarding the ghost ship and seemingly slaying Bellum while returning Zelda to life and health. Before they can leave, however, Bellum reveals it was still alive and petrified both Zelda and Link. Luckily, one of their allies rose to the challenge and freed them both, though he was controlled by Bellum as an enemy afterward. Thankfully, Bellum was defeated without permanent harm to their friend, and the group parted ways, with Link and Zelda continuing their search for a new home. This timeline ends with Spirit Tracks. Eventually, the same Link, Zelda, and friends discovered a new continent they dubbed New Hyrule and founded a kingdom. Long before their arrival, the Demon King Malladus was sealed deep beneath the earth using a system of elaborate tracks, the Spirit Tracks, a tower, and some magical temples. The modern peoples used these tracks for trains, because why wouldn't you? About 100 years after New Hyrule was settled, one of Malladus's minions began destroying sections of the Spirit Tracks in hopes of freeing his master. Link, who in this game is a train engineer, sets out with Zelda and others to solve the problem, only to have Zelda's soul wrenched from her body so that her body could be used as a vessel for Malladus's return. Zelda's spirit continued traveling with Link, lending assistance when able. They were unable to stop Malladus from possessing Zelda's body, but did defeat him without causing Zelda lasting damage. Afterwards, Malladus possessed his minion before being permanently destroyed. Zelda regained her body, and peace settled over the land once more.
In the Child Era, the young Link who defeated Ganon in Ocarina of Time has another adventure shortly after revealing Ganon's plot to the kingdom. In search for a fairy friend who disappeared in the aftermath of Ocarina of Time, Link leaves Hyrule, taking us to the events of Majora's Mask. In the beginning of the game, Link encounters the Skull Kid, a forest creature from Hyrule who had acquired the powerful but malevolent Majora's Mask. Through the mask's power, memories, evil, and the Skull Kid's personal past trauma, a world called Termina was created and Link was dragged into it along with the Skull Kid. After spending 3 days in Termina, Link discovered that the moon was going to fall to the surface, destroying everything. To prevent this, Link rewound time, allowing him to replay those same 3 days over and over until he discovered that 4 giants could be summoned to catch the moon, stopping it from falling. He proceeded to free and call each of them to foil the mask's plans, then did battle with Majora's Mask and the Skull Kid, freeing the Skull Kid from the mask and helping to heal the kid's trauma. Apparently afterward, when Link left Termina, it ceased to exist.
The next game is Twilight Princess. When Ganon's plans were revealed at the end of Ocarina of Time, he was sentenced to death. However, during his execution, Ganon manifested the Triforce of Power, granting him the strength necessary to survive a seemingly fatal wound and to kill one of the sages who were his executioners. He was then banished to the Twilight Realm. Generations later, Twilight Princess begins with Ganon granting power to Zant, one of the Twili, residents of the Twilight Realm, who then overthrew the ruler of the Twili, Midna, the titular Twilight Princess. She was banished to Hyrule, which Zant subsequently used Ganon's power to invade, covering much of the land in mystical twilight, transforming people into beasts, spirits, and such. Whilst trying to save some friends, Link, in this game a simple farmhand, enters a twilight-cursed bit of Hyrule, is transformed into a wolf, and is subsequently captured. Link and Midna join forces to escape, finding Zelda as well, who informs them of the trouble plaguing their land. Link and Midna traverse Hyrule, restoring light to the land. They also seek and assemble pieces of an ancient Twili weapon for use against Zant. However, he foils their plans, stealing the assembled weapon and nearly killing Midna. Link brings her to Zelda, who is able to heal Midna, though seemingly at the cost of her own life, and sends Link off to acquire the Master Sword to completely rid himself of the wolf form curse. Afterward, Link and Midna travel to the Twilight Realm, kill Zant, and battle Ganon, with life being restored to Zelda's body in the process, while Midna is seemingly slain by Ganon. When Link finally defeats Ganon, Midna's life and true form are restored. She'd been cursed into an impish body. She thanks Link and Zelda before returning to the Twilight Realm, shattering the gateway so such a calamity could never be repeated.
The last game in the child timeline is Four Swords Adventures, not to be confused with Four Swords. In this game, hundreds of years after Ganon's death in Twilight Princess, Ganon was reincarnated, and, in an interesting twist, conspired to free Vati from his imprisonment in the Four Sword, and use him as a powerful partner/stooge. Zelda, sensing the looming threat of Vati's return, traveled with 6 shrine maidens to the resting place of the Four Sword, intent on strengthening the seal. But Ganon manipulated events to scatter and imprison Zelda and the maidens, while getting Link to draw the Four Sword from its pedestal. While this gave Link the power to split into 4, it also released Vati from his imprisonment. Link then proceeded to rescue Zelda, the Shrine Maidens, permanently kill Vati, and in another twist imprison Ganon within the Four Sword in Vati's place.
Sometime after Link's death and Ganon's imprisonment in the Dark Realm, the doorway to the Dark Realm opened once more, with many entering the Dark Realm in search of the Triforce's power. None returned, however, and instead Ganon's demons flooded the land. In a last-ditch effort, the 7 sages sealed the doorway once more, cutting off the flow of evil for a time. This leads us to the A Link to the Past game. Years passed, and a series of disasters struck Hyrule, which were solved by Ganon himself in the guise of the wizard Aghanim, who used his heroics to gain favor with the king before getting rid of him and mind-controlling Hyrule's soldiers. He then set about finding the descendants of the 7 sages, 7 maidens, Zelda included, and banished them to the Dark Realm in order to break the seal on himself, so that he could rule both the light and dark worlds. Zelda was the last to be captured and telepathically called to Link for aid, who proceeded to rescue and hide her before seeking out the Master Sword in order to gain the power needed to defeat Aghanim/Ganon. After acquiring the Master Sword, Zelda was captured again and sent to the Dark Realm. Link defeated Aghanim, but was sent to the Dark Realm as well, eventually gaining the power to travel back and forth between the 2 worlds. Link freed all of the maidens, defeating Aghanim once more before engaging in a final showdown with Ganon in his true form. Afterward, Link wished upon the Triforce, restoring peace to the land, light to the realm of darkness, and life to those who had been lost in the conflict.
The next game is Link's Awakening. In this game, the same Link from A Link to the Past departed Hyrule to train in preparation for new upcoming disasters. On an ocean voyage, he was caught in a terrible storm and washed up on an island. Link eventually learned that the only way to leave was by waking the Windfish, who slept atop the highest mountain on the island. Link spends the entire game collecting the items necessary to do so, only to discover that the entire island and everyone on it was a dream of the Windfish and thus would all vanish once it awoke. For his part, once the Windfish was awoken, Link came to consciousness floating on debris in the middle of the ocean. He must have survived, though, because this same Link is the hero for the next two games, Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, which share an intertwined story. After Ganon's defeat at Link's hands in A Link to the Past, Ganon's twin surrogate mothers, Twin Rova, came up with a plan to revive him. They'd need to summon up 3 powerful and specific flames, then sacrifice someone to cap it off. To that end, they sent 2 powerful minions of theirs to 2 different countries where the flames would be lit. Link is transported to one of these countries by the Triforce itself, and proceeds to save the oracles of both Seasons and Ages, wielding magics that manipulate the seasons and time respectively to combat Twin Rova's minions. Despite dispatching both of said minions, Link fails to stop them from lighting their fires, and Twin Rova then kidnaps Zelda to light both the final fire and act as a sacrifice. Link arrives in time to stop them, killing Twin Rova instead of letting Zelda die, but they manage to spin their deaths into a sort of ghetto completion of the ritual, which brings Ganon back, but as a mindless monster, who Link then slays once again, before returning to Hyrule with Zelda. Centuries later, we get A Link Between Worlds. An evil wizard, Yuga, captures the descendants of the 7 sages, newest Zelda included, and takes them to Lorule, a mirror world of Hyrule. There, Yuga uses the sages' descendants to resurrect Ganon and fuse with him, gaining his power. Originally, this was all the behest of Lorule's Zelda counterpart, who wished to steal Hyrule's Triforce because the people of Lorule had destroyed theirs, only to find out that without it, Lorule was literally falling to pieces. In the end, though, Yuga betrayed her, taking her power for himself. Link defeats Yuga, returns everyone to their proper home, and uses Hyrule's Triforce to wish Lorule's Triforce back into existence. Everyone wins.
The last 2 games in this timeline are the first 2 Zelda games ever released. The Legend of Zelda, followed by The Adventure of Link. In the aftermath of A Link to the Past, Hyrule flourished, as the royal family had ready access to the completed Triforce. Generations passed, and eventually one of the kings decided his son wasn't worthy of the Triforce, and worried that being unworthy would lead to evil spreading in the land. So, he split the Triforce, giving the Triforces of Wisdom and Power to his son, while entrusting his daughter Zelda with hiding away the Triforce of Courage. The prince, furious, had Zelda magically questioned so hard that she was cast into eternal slumber, never to reveal her secrets. Generations more passed, and Ganon revived once more, stealing the Triforce of Power and wreaking havoc on the land. Fearing what Ganon would be capable of with both the Triforce of Power and Wisdom, this game's Zelda split the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces and sent Impa to find someone who could defeat Ganon. Eventually, she found Link, who collected the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, then defeated Ganon. In The Adventure of Link, time passes and he is told the story of the other Zelda, the one living in a magic coma. Turns out they still had her body locked away sleeping somewhere, and no one had ever seen the Triforce of Courage since. Link set out to find the Triforce of Courage and woke the Elder Zelda from her sleep. All the while, Ganon's minions pursued Link, believing that his blood could be used to revive Ganon once more. But with the Triforce completed once again, peace was brought to Hyrule.
The last 2 games in the franchise as a whole lie at the end of the timeline. They take place so far into the future that which timeline they belong to doesn't really matter, which is good because the developers have been frustratingly and intentionally vague on which timeline they sit in, saying only that they are chronologically the latest games in the series and that it's basically up to we, the player base, to decide individually where the games lie. These games are Breath of the Wild and Hyrule Warriors 2: Age of Calamity. It's also worth noting that Age of Calamity is of questionable canonicity, but it ties in with Breath of the Wild and is the most recently released game real world, so we're including it. As a last note on that, Age of Calamity actually causes the timeline to branch again, as it creates an alternate timeline from that of Breath of the Wild.
So, by the time of Breath of the Wild, Ganon's continual rebirth and terrorize cycle has been recognized as a recurring phenomenon that needs to be dealt with. To that end, the people of Hyrule developed powerful technology specifically designed to combat Ganon and to aid the Link and Zelda of their time in defeating him whenever he should arise. The tech takes many forms, but the most notable are the 4 divine beasts, massive combat platforms that key to a single pilot, and smaller guardians that operate independently. Approximately 10,000 years before the game begins, Hyrule successfully fended off Ganon with this approach, dropping a literal army plus Link and Zelda on Ganon when he showed up. The time between Ganon's next appearance grew so long, however, that the technology was forgotten, buried, etc. And not until a little over 100 years before Breath of the Wild begins did they begin investigating things, digging it up, and remembering how it worked, as Ganon was prophetically meant to rise soon. In preparation for this, Zelda and others tracked down the greatest heroes of the 4 races, one to pilot each of the divine beasts, as well as Link himself to be ready to wield the Master Sword against Ganon.
Unfortunately, all of their preparations blew up in their face because this time, when Ganon showed up, he corrupted all of the technology designed to combat him, turning it on Link, Zelda, and the others. The 4 heroes died. Link was saved only at the last minute by Zelda and was placed in a healing tank with wounds so severe he didn't come out of the healing coma until 100 years later. During that time, Zelda locked both herself and Ganon into Hyrule Castle, magically containing most but not nearly all of his evil and malevolence on the castle grounds. The game begins 100 years later after Link awakens with no memory of any of these events. He spends the game regaining his memories and strength in preparation for confronting Ganon, as well as freeing the imprisoned spirits of the 4 heroes, his friends, whose souls had been trapped in the Divine Beast for the last century. Together, the 5 of them take on Ganon in Hyrule Castle, and Zelda lends what age she has left after locking Ganon up for 100 years. And Ganon is defeated.
Age of Calamity takes place in an alternate timeline. In Age of Calamity, on that day when Ganon arose, the 4 heroes died, Link was put into stasis, and Zelda carried the whole team by locking Ganon away. Yes, that all seemed to have happened in one day. A special guardian named Terrako was awoken by the immense energy that Zelda released to contain Ganon, and it traveled back in time, though a shard of Ganon's malice followed Terrako back in time as well. Resultantly, the time-traveling guardians sought out Zelda and the other heroes to warn them of the oncoming calamity, while at the same time, Ganon's malice corrupted the dormant Terrako of that time and gave Ganon's allies the same information. Thus, the 2 sides began moving, the heroes to ensure that the calamity was averted, and the bad guys to make sure that everything happened as it does in the Breath of the Wild timeline. With the help of Terrako's foreknowledge, Link and the others manage to succeed. Terrako even pulls allies from 100 years in the future, i.e. the present day of the Breath of the Wild game, to save the lives of the 4 heroes, allowing them to stand with Link and Zelda in the final battle, defeating Ganon once again, thus sparing the land of the 100 years of ruin suffered by the Breath of the Wild timeline.
And that's basically the story of Link, Hero of Courage. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and maybe share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for topics you'd like to see in the future, do like all of these lovely people and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see more of our Let's Plays in the future, head over to our gaming channel and subscribe there.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons, signing off.